This is Sporting Life.
Well, welcome along to the Sporting Life Racing Podcast. David Orr, joined by Graham Cunningham, Billy Nash, Ed Chamberlain. The Breeders' Cup vets, there was a late expulsion to brandished to Ben Linfoot. He didn't scope clean this morning, a late absentee. He'll get well soon. Scoop, we've got loads to go through this week, including, of course, that Breeders' Cup. But, so we must start with the sad news from last week. Friday, it broke, the death of Alastair Down, a giant of the press room. You had a lovely tribute piece on Sporting Life on Friday to him. I mean, what are your memories of Alastair as you look back now?
Yeah, morning, lads, and morning, everyone. Really, really good memories overall. At the moment, obviously, when anyone passes who you know, you're a bit shocked and really sad. But after a little while, you start to think about the more positive elements. And he was just not a unique character. No one's completely unique, but he was a rare one in that he was extremely talented. He could be extremely infuriating at times, but he was funny. He was generally witty, and it's not a word we use very much nowadays, but he was a charmer, Alastair. He was a charmer. He charmed people. I'll give you an example. He used to have little devices. We all do in media and in life in general. He has little devices like he'd come up and he'd say, "Oh, someone was praising you to me the other day," and it made you puff your chest out. But I kept saying, "Who was it?" And of course he couldn't remember because it was a bit of bluster by and large. But he was a charmer for both sexes, Alastair Down, and he was a romantic in the best possible way. And he had an enormous career. He ran a huge race, but it got the better of him in the end. Both his smoking and drinking and the chaos and tragedy in his life, it created a burden for him that was hard to bear in the end. So it was very strange that we were chatting and joking and talking about him in a very positive way on this podcast just last week. And I didn't think he had a right lot of race left to run, but I was shocked when it came so quickly.
And Ed, a giant of the journalistic world and as a broadcaster as well. I mean, some of his end-of-day raps at Cheltenham were just magical on the highlights show. And a fantastically natural broadcaster.
GC's put it beautifully there. He ran an almighty race. He really did. And GC, I commend you on the piece you wrote there, because I know that would have been hard for you, because I know speaking to you last week what he meant to you. And that was such an interesting read, because you forget about some of his work, the top seas case and so on. And he was very kind to me. I wouldn't say I knew him well, but he was always texting me, particularly when I first started, cajoling me along. And he wrote a very nice piece about the way I go about things and described me as very laid back and so on. And he'd often text me and saying, "Well done." He'd often advise, and he'd often be rude about the clothes I was wearing. That was Alastair. Very, very charming, as you say, very amusing, and an absolute titan of the press room. And I was going through, I spent Friday evening, Saturday mornings, I wanted to do him justice on the show, which they did on the morning very well with Alice. And then the afternoon, I wanted to close the show with a quote that Alastair would have used to sum up the day, and I had a few options. And honestly, some of the quotes from him about Corto and about Cheltenham, and I was there for hours just reading through his copy, just so beautifully written. And I actually used, in the end, because after Envoy Len and Chianti Classico and The Real Whacker, I talked about when he wrote about the love that National Hunt Racing brings to people, and just said that National Hunt Racing loved Alastair, which I think it really, really did, in particular Cheltenham.
And Billy, a writer who would express strong opinions when he felt it was needed. I mean, we touched on the top seas case there, the famous one, the article about the Grand National, Red Marauder, Smarty, that Grand National. He didn't hold back in the Aintree press room that evening.
He did not. He was, like you said, he had very strong opinions, and he was able to craft them beautifully onto the page. You know, a lot of us have opinions. Not many of us can get them down in the manner that Alastair Down could. You know, he was a tremendous writer. A piece that sticks out in my mind was he wrote a beautiful piece about Captain Tim Forster when he died. I remember reading that piece, and in particular, that was one that stood out in my mind. But yeah, the lads knew him a lot better than I did. But he was a tremendous writer, and he'll be a big loss.
Absolutely. Really sad news and thoughts with Alice's family and friends. We're going to move on and look at the Breeders' Cup now, look back at the Breeders' Cup. We made the point Billy, last week you weren't on the show. One of your regular holidays. I've got a little chart. I have of podcast holidays. You're winning at the minute, but we made the point that not to get overreact to however it went with City of Troy. If it bombed out, that was a case. But that really was a performance that shamed a continent, wasn't it?
Now, where do I go with that one?
Well, it's
on a day where another continent has been quite badly shamed, the less said the better about that one. Yeah, look, unfortunately, his race was run after about 4 yards. The minute he came out of the stalls, he was beaten. He probably did well to get as close as he did in the circumstances. I think if O'Brien is to do it again, and I'm sure they will have another crack at a Breeders' Cup Classic at some point, I think if they're to do it again, they might well decide to go and give the horse a prep run on dirt beforehand, because clearly a day trip to Suddle, running around on Tapeta it gets him out of the yard, but it's not particularly beneficial when it comes to dirt racing. So their original plan was to go for the Travers. I think perhaps in hindsight it might have been a good idea to run him there, give him experience on the dirt, let him know what to expect. And I think if they are to go back with another horse in the near future, which I'm sure they will, I wouldn't be at all surprised if that's what they did. But lesson learned perhaps. Unfortunately, wasn't to be for City of Troy, but he'll retire as a very good horse, not a great horse, but he'll retire as a very good Ballydoyle horse.
And that's an important line from Billy there, GC. He's retired. His 75,000 fee at Coolmore next year, but 130 time form rating is not Aidan's best he's ever trained, despite him saying so on numerous occasions through the season. Does he go down as an all-time great? Where does he sit on the rankings?
No, he doesn't go down as an all-time great, and I'm not knocking him in that regard. He was the undisputed star of an otherwise fairly middling flat season. It's not completely over yet, but we can say that he was the star in a year that didn't really shine. And if you go back just through Derby winners, he was a good, strong, solid, emphatic Derby winner. But if you just look, say, since 2000, tell me which of these horses accomplished more on the racecourse than City of Troy. See the Stars. That's a most definite yes, isn't it? Sindar is a most definite yes, with his runaway Irish Derby win and his Arc success. Golden Horn, possibly. He won an Arc. High Chaparral, he was the one given a chance to keep going and do it at 4, and by God, he did it. So he's sort of scraping into my top 5 Derby winners of the last 20 years. I'm not knocking the horse. He's a terrific horse, and I really liked him right from the start. But it's a legacy of the fact that a lot of the other supposed stars didn't really shine this year, and the sizzle that Aidan O'Brien and the lads, remember, he's our Frankel on Dewhurst Day, the sizzle that they generated around him and kept the fires burning all the way through until last weekend.
And Ed, what was your career-defining moment with him? Would it be that Juddmonte International at York?
Yes. That was the standout performance for sure. The comeback in the Derby, probably, in terms of storylines, after so many wrote him off, and an extraordinary piece of training that to come back and win the Derby. But in terms of performance, it would definitely be the Juddmonte. I'm hugely grateful to him, really. I mean, he was the one horse that got people talking this season. As GC said, without City of Troy, you look at this flat season, it would have been a little bit dull, wouldn't it? And Saturday night, to show you the demand, we talked a lot about the cut through he might have, just to show you the demand for the Breeders' Cup. It got just over half of the number of people watching that watched the Charlie Hall at Wetherby, which tells you a good deal. And it wasn't a pretty hour, if I'm honest, Audie, with what happened to poor old JRB in the turf. And then it's pretty ugly, the Classic, isn't it, really, to a sports audience? And you see that Edward Whittaker photograph with all the dirt in City of Troy's face. It's not pretty. It was a huge shame. As you say, a really, really good horse that got people talking, but not an all-time great.
It's interesting. Bookmakers say betting turnover was really strong on the Classic, that it was by far the most popular race on the Saturday, eclipsing the domestic action. So double stakes on the Classic. Definitely got cut through. I'm glad they had a go, and I'm sure they'll be back.
You look at it, often a guide to that, Audie, is the papers. Newspapers still, I know times have moved on, but the newspapers still are a good guide. It's something I do every Saturday morning, always read every page of the newspapers, the sports pages anyway, and City of Troy was everywhere. Every single newspaper led in the racing columns with City of Troy, which tells you a lot.
Imagine it'd be a popular point of call for the mares first season that stood. Billy and August Road down in at 30,000. They've gone much lower with the previous year's debut, and I suppose no surprise there.
No, we'll see. We'll wait and see what happens in Japan. They could yet hike it up, but yes, certainly on his performances this year. Are you surprised? I mean, he's hardly top of the tree if you're looking for a potential stallion. I would have thought at the moment there are other candidates, even in Coolmore, that would be probably a surer bet than Augusto Dan, because yes, he has loads of ability, but he had plenty of off days as well. So it's been a chastening few weeks, I suppose, for Ballydoyle, with their better older horses. At least their 2-year-olds are holding up extremely well, so the future is bright in that regard.
Let's talk about those 2-year-olds now, GC. Lake Victoria on the juvenile fillies turf, despite plenty going wrong. She looks a fair tool.
She looks a terrific horse, and she is the one, or one of the ones, who's come up without real hype. I don't think she was rated in the top 2 or 3 Ballydoyle juvenile fillies early on, but she's carved her way right to the top of the tree, 5 from 5. She had no real right to win that race last Friday after what happened with the bad interference early on, but she won it in handsome style, and she's now 3-1 for the 1,000 guineas, 4-1 for Desert Flower, and that could be a tremendous Ballydoyle Godolphin battle if all goes well between now and next May for the 1,000 guineas, because they look 2 crackerjacks. 119p for Lake Victoria, time form, 117p for Desert Flower. But she's by Frankel, Lake Victoria, and it's hard to think that she's not going to train on really well.
And Ed, when you see a filly win like that, and GC mentioned Desert Flower as well, who we saw winning so well at Newmarket, it does whet the appetite for next. I think you're right, this season never hit the heights, quite reached heights we expected. There's a few flames burning for 2025.
She's different class, I think. I really do. I couldn't believe it. I'd actually, as I was reading my Alastair Down quotes that Friday night, I'd done the double, Lake Victoria and East Avenue, who bombed out in the juvenile that followed. And honestly, I'd given up on that turn when she got cut up like she did. I think Ryan made it look less bad than it actually was. It was one of those instances as a punter, you think, it's gone. It's absolutely gone. And I just couldn't believe what she did. Either the rest of them were absolute garbage or she is brilliant. And I think it's probably the latter. I thought it was the performance of the weekend, Audie. I thought it was genuinely brilliant from Lake Victoria. It was the one performance all weekend when I went, wow.
Well, I went, wow, in the juvenile turf with Hemi Matisse, Billy.
In surprise or wonderment?
Well, maybe both. He's been called a few names, including on this podcast, through his career. I think he won that without knowing he was in a race, didn't he? He almost went past the line without knowing he was in front. I thought it was a fantastic ride, and plenty went his way. But do you think they'll be able to believe their luck that they landed a big pot with him?
I think they'll definitely believe their luck, because there's no doubt he had the ability. It was just managing to get it out of him. And as you say, like a terrific ride from Ryan Moore. He smuggled him to the front, and that's probably the way to ride him now. I mean, I'm sure that I've learned plenty about him. I think going a mile or going that extra distance and probably quicker ground as well, it all helped. But definitely he was more straightforward. And maybe that's just because of the way he was ridden, that, like you said, he was just produced late without really knowing he was in the race. But there's no doubt that the ability has been there from a long time ago. There have been temperament issues. They put blinkers on him in Paris, which Aidan is adamant was a mistake, that he just wasn't mature enough. But he's a very good 2-year-old. Another Wootton Bassett. Wootton Bassett has had a fantastic year. He put himself right into the Guineas picture. Now, if you look at Aidan's past winners of that juvenile turf, there haven't been any massive, real standout stars come out of it. I think Henri Matisse has the ability to be one of them, but at the same time, we'll have to wait and see just how he trains on as a 3-year-old. But yeah, he's put himself firmly into the 2,000 Guineas picture. But when you look at the depth of talent that Ballydoyle have in that 2-year-old department for next year, it's kind of scary, to be honest with you.
You both touched on it, but he never felt the whip once, did he? It's going to be interesting to see what happens, if he does have to be given a couple of liveners next year. But without the whip, he's a good horse. He's back down to 8-1 for the Guineas. But you've also got the Lion in Winter. You've got Expanded. You've got Twain, all from Ballydoyle. And it's at 6-1 the field. I think they want 2,000 Guineas at the moment.
Yeah, wide open classic at this stage. And Billy, it's not been quite as big a year for Jer Lyons as it has been previously, but it's ended on a high. Breeders' Cup winner for him and Colin Keane in the juvenile turf sprint. It seemed a big moment for the team.
Won't absolutely. Ger has been steadily progressing the last couple of years. He had a couple of classic winners recently, the likes of Siskin and the Oaks winner that even so for Coolmore. So yeah, he's been building up his operation. He's been getting better and better. And this is the next step up, if you like. We spoke about him on the podcast a couple of times this year, that his record in Britain has been pretty miserable, to be honest, the last couple of years since he won the Ebor. I'm not sure he's had a winner in Britain since. But, this sort of blew that one out of the water. He's been bigging up this horse for a while already, this Magnum Force. He's been talking about how good he is, which is not particularly like Ger. He doesn't generally overhype his horses, but he's been telling us all year how good this fella is. In fairness to the horse, he has been progressing gradually, but this was another step up again. And again, a fantastic ride from Colin Keane. I think Ger described him afterwards as the most underrated champion jockey on planet Earth, which is, it's probably a fair quote, because Colin Keane there's a touch of the Mackays about Colin Keane. He was champion apprentice in Ireland in 2014, and in the 10 years since, he's been champion jockey 6 times and runner-up 4 times. But he doesn't get the recognition, I think, on the international stage that he deserves. He is possibly, Ireland's next global superstar jockey. He's in the Mick Kinane mould. He just needs to get the rides. He's a fantastic rider, and this will hopefully catapult him into that sort of domain, because he deserves it, I think.
That was another nice quote from Jer, wasn't it? The world needs to wake up to him. It was a really nice way of summing up his thoughts about it's going potentially way down the line. Ryan Moore's 41, but he would be right at the front of the queue to take over the Ballydoyle job if that came available in the next few years, wouldn't he, Billy?
He to be top of the list. He's only 30, so you'd have to think that his best years are still ahead of him. So yes, if something happened to Ryan Moore in the morning and you were looking for a replacement jockey, certainly Colin Keane would be top of the list. But then again, he's in a good spot at the moment. We said Ger Lyons hadn't a brilliant year, but it's certainly ended well for him. He's got plenty to go to war with next year. Magnum Force looks an out-and-out sprinter. My mate Alfie has been a very good sprinter, so maybe the Irish sprinter's on the way up already. And
what are you drinking, Billy? What's in that mug?
Just coffee at this hour of the morning. Okay. But yeah, watch this space, And he also has Babouche. He's got a couple of nice fillies, the likes of Red Letter. So the Ger Lyons yard is pretty strong at the moment.
Don't take the sprinters off us, Billy. That's my plea to the Irish traders. That's all we've got. It's literally all we've got. Not quite the case. We've got Charlie Appleby in Newmarket, and another successful Breeders' Cup for him. Not quite his 50% strike rate he went in with, but Rebels Romance got the job done again in the turf. And he's like a throwback to Godolphin when it first started, isn't it? A globe-trotting Group 1 winning machine.
Amazing, really. And you think this horse, he's won 13 times, 7 different countries. He's won over 9 million quid in prize money. But what percentage, or do you think, of ITV viewers would ever even have heard of Rebels Romance? Not many. Not many. Isn't that extraordinary? I thought Buick was sensational on this horse because there was no pace in the race. And I thought he rode most of them to sleep. And we talked about it last week. That was a theme again over the 2 days, how much better our lads are than theirs. Even that American jockey, Frankie Dettori, had a shocker, which we'll come to on Emily Upjohn. But Colin Keane was sensational in the race you've just talked about. Buick was sensational a couple of times, particularly on Rebels Romance. Ryan was sensational pretty much throughout. They were on a different planet, I think, to the local jockeys. You look at the ride that the sprinter got that I fancy, Cockburn. Oh, my God. And our boys are very, very good. I know we've got good horses as well, but our jockeys, full credit to them. I don't think they get the praise they deserve on a weekend like that. I thought compared to their American counterparts, they were sensational. And Buick on Rebels Romance was one of the best.
You can add Ross Orion to that list as well, Ed.
Yes, I forgot about him. Yeah, what a ride that was on Starless.
Starless ride, which was pretty much identical to Colin Keane on Magnum Force. Hardly wasting an inch in a race where the leaders went probably a fair bit too fast.
And GC, in terms of Appleby, Rebels Romance on target, he ran 7 in the Breeders' Cup races, 6 finished in the first 4. That ability to spot the right horse to take to the meeting, he's deadly with him, isn't he?
Yeah, it's becoming ever more important to the Appleby operation North America now. Emory City, 3rd. Al Qudra was the one who didn't hit the frame, but he might have done had he not been very badly hampered. Star of Mystery, 4th. Rebels Romance, the winner. Cinderella's Dream and Beautiful Love, second and fourth in the filly and mare turf, and Notable Speech, a more than respectable third in the mile. So it was a very solid weekend. But I agree with what Ed said about Buick's ride. In terms of a difference maker, winning and losing a real major race, that was one of the key rides, because I was going to say the Japanese lads, but it was one Japanese lad and one French lad, Lemaire, and another Japanese rider on the placed horses in the turf, that were just all dressed up with nowhere to go, which brings us very neatly to Eftertori.
Perfect. So, Billy Nash, if you're Kevin Schumacher watching the Breeders' Cup turf, you've had the expulsion too, you've tried your best on Emily Upjohn all season. I mean, I'm sure he's not that way inclined to be smiling as he was watching what was happening on down the straight, but she never got a shot at it whatsoever, did she?
She passed the post on the bridle. I mean, the filly would probably have done more in a piece of work at home than she did on the track on Saturday. It was a complete write-off from that point of view. So yeah, if you were Kieran Schumacher, I'm sure you were probably beaming from ear to ear watching that race, because it was a disaster from start to finish. It happens on American tracks, you know. Frankie tried going down the inside, and you ride for luck, and he didn't get any. So, but yeah, he didn't seem to get half the stick that Schumacher would have got if he had been in that position as well, you know. So that comes with being a multiple champion jockey, I suppose.
She's a slightly slow starter, but it was a horror trip the entire way around. I was a bit surprised that the media didn't make more of it. John Gosden took it in a very stoic manner, saying she's a big girl and she nearly always starts a bit slowly. But I was surprised by John Gosden saying that's it for her, because as Billy said, she had no sort of a race. She would have done more through the week in the morning. And there's a couple of very valuable Hong Kong options, which she would be very viable for. But I wonder if John has bad memories about, it may have been the last time he went to Hong Kong with a young William Buick on the Fugue, who didn't quite get the Emily Upjohn run, but it wasn't far off it.
A couple of things there, Audie. One, the NBC coverage is fabulous and gets rightly praised, but they don't like looking back much. I mean, we'd be slaughtered if we didn't cover things like that. And Nick, who's sensational, as we know, if he hadn't done that Aidan O'Brien interview re City of Troy, there wouldn't have been a whole lot of analysis on that either. I thought Nick saved that situation a bit. And I don't want to go on about Del Mar. If you go there, and I was there, whatever it was, 4 years ago, it's a sensational place. It's no surprise that Scoop's a non-runner today. It takes a bit out of you. It is a magical place to go. But as a World Championships on a turf course, and we're back there again next year, some of those races are pretty unsatisfactory. You mentioned that Godolphin horse, Cinderella Rose, was it? Emily Upjohn. The bad luck stories in a World Championships around that inner turf course, there are just so many, which is, I find, a bit frustrating.
Yeah, you touched on that last week, and I was sort of primed for it. And I'd say more than half the races had either a notable hard luck story or a jockey who seemed to blow a gasket in one way or another.
And walking on the surface as well, if you go there, walking on the surface, it's the strangest grass. It's just, the whole thing is a bit weird on that turf course, but it is a magnificent place that puts on a sensational show. So I'm reluctant to criticise too much.
Don't. We're back there next year, Ed. Don't be putting the boot in just yet. So might not be Scoop on the plane in 2025. Billy, one thing that did... Well, I'm overdue. Billy, one thing that struck me, like Emily Upjohn and the season she's had, it's often the people with momentum, isn't it, where the gaps opened up, and that was very much the case for Rafe Beckett. I mean, what a year he's had. And I mean, that's turf sprint win must go down in the absolute bonus ball territory for them, him and Ross Ryan.
I mean, like you said, they're absolutely on the crest of a wave, the two of them all year. It's just, you know, you couldn't think it's going to get any better, and it does. It seems to get better by the week for the two of them. So, yeah, fantastic for both. It was a result I personally didn't see coming, but that's the nature of the sprints this year. They've been like that, you know, and it was...
Dominated by the Brits, do you mean? Was that what you mean they've been like
this
that?
year, yeah, just, you know, enjoy it while you can, Artie. But yeah, it was Starlust's turn this time, and you know, Rossa found the gaps when he needed them. So you know, hats off to them. It's been a phenomenal year for both.
I hate saying this after time, but when you look at, he was 34-1, lads. You know, given that he'd been pretty close up in a couple of really big ones here, but as Ed touched on, from the moment that Coburn went off like his arse was on fire, your hopes would have started to increase right away, wouldn't they?
And
what the poor, my beloved Believing. I mean, the poor cycling mob. We go all the way to America, and thank God she's all right.
Yeah.
But the whole race it was a brilliant story with Starlass, and the stewards' inquiry afterwards. Again, we're going to be thinking back to that when we have a 20-minute stewards' inquiry over in this country, but it was unsatisfactory, really.
But GC, you touched upon it, the tragic event on the night. Brian Meehan took a good horse out to Del Mar, JRB, a trainer who's found winners hard to come by, but it's had big winners, especially with this fella this season. To lose him for his team must be absolutely heartbreaking.
That's the thing that, it's really, really sad when a good horse goes down like that. But lots of the major operations have plenty more good horses back at home, and Brian Meehan doesn't. So he was a stable star in a race he'd won twice before. So that was the real downer on the night, because he'd been progressing right through the season, that horse, and it must be a bloody long way home when you've undergone something like that.
Yeah, 100%. Billy, let's talk about the Lexus Melbourne Cup, which took place on Tuesday. Willie Mullins is going to give it a go again. He's getting closer. Absurd was 5th this time, and it was a bold ride right from the rear. Came from second last down the straight. Could you argue he could potentially have been a bit unlucky?
I'm not sure you could say for certain that it cost him the race. He might have finished a place or two closer. They pretty much told us that's what they were going to do. They rode him for luck, and it's that kind of a race. The gaps either come or they don't. And McAvoy took the brave man's route down the inside. And in fairness to the horse, he ran a cracker. He was beaten less than 2 lengths. It was a big performance by him, and you could see why he'd be tempted to go back again next year, because he's running it twice now, and he certainly didn't disgrace himself last year. And like I said, this was a pretty excellent run from him, really. Vauban, slightly disappointing, didn't seem to have any excuses on the day. He was close enough, if good enough, and didn't really go anywhere. But I suppose the story of the race really was young Robbie Dolan. Massive win for him. Another Irishman from Kildare. His dad worked for Dermot Well for years and years on the Curragh, and Robbie he kind of made his name on The Voice in Australia. Looked like he was destined for a singing career at one stage, but he's firmly in the big time now, thanks to the Melbourne Cup win.
So he met the trainer on a cruise. He was singing on the cruise, had a selfie with her in the Melbourne Cup, and ends up winning the Melbourne Cup for her. And she's the stepmom, GC. Do you remember Roger Laxton, the cameraman? He does features. I think he might have done them for Channel 4 and ITV. She's his stepmom. I mean, it's just the most lovely story.
Really? No, I don't think I remember Roger, but no, good on Robbie Dolan. And he said he arrived in Australia a few years ago with a backpack. That was it. Chasing a dream. And look how his life's turned around now. He's in history forever, and on the stage at the Crown Casino, knocking out a few tunes with Ronan Keating last night, I believe.
You can't have it all. You can't all the highs through your career. Billy, interesting lines on Vauban from Rich Ritchie on the Nick Luck podcast on Tuesday. He might sell him, might leave him, might stay in Australia, might come back hurdling. It's all up in the air with him at the minute. It's a difficult one, isn't it? What do you do? Go around on the flat again, hoping to land another Lonsdale Cup or something? Or would you be sending him hurdling again this winter?
So that is the problem. I mean, where do you go with him? I mean, they kind of shelved his hurdling career in order to have another crack at the Melbourne Cup. And look, he's done really well on the flat with him. He's picked up plenty of prize money. He's clearly a talented flat horse. But yeah, I mean, unless you want to keep going down that sort of route, you're kind of stuck doing that. So maybe there's more options for him in Australia, somewhere like that. There'd be plenty of big prizes out there. I'm sure he'd be a valuable horse out there. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if that's what they do. If they bring him back here, I would imagine that they'll try, and they will have another crack over hurdles with him, because, why not at this stage? But yeah, we'll wait and see, But like I said, I wouldn't be at all surprised if they do move him on now at this point.
And Ed, in terms of Absurd, a county hurdle winner, he loves a big... They're finding out how to ride him, clearly, delivering him as late as possible. Could he? I mean, it's a relatively bare cupboard. Dan Skelton's taking aim with the mare's winner at the Fighting Fifth, because he thinks only 2 or 3 take on Constitution Hill. Could Absurd be a potential springer in that champion hurdle market?
Of course. You look back at last year's champion hurdle and see how thin it is. Of course he could. Yeah, absolutely. I think people who say he's unlucky, I mean, that's the way you got to ride him. I mean, it's going to happen, isn't it? There's no other way of going about it now with Absurd. So I didn't necessarily feel that sorry for him. But yeah, why not? God, we need them badly. We need horses like that to have a right crack at races like that, because as you say, the cupboard is very, very bare, particularly in this country.
Just looking, 10 of the first 14 at home in the Melbourne Cup. Not the winner, granted, but 10 of the first 14 started their careers in Britain or Ireland. So we might not be able to win the race with our trainers, but it's probable, isn't it, lads, that the real handy horses for the Melbourne Cup now are snapped up to be trained in Australia well before the big races run.
Yeah, and I wonder if they're paying the money they are, as who would take the horses in training sale every autumn. But GC, it wasn't all doom and gloom out there. Lake Forest, massive payday for Kieran Fallon, although we lost some of it in the fine afterwards, and William Haggett, a fine piece of placing.
It's the Golden Eagle, isn't it? Not the Everest, as I put on our running order. It just sounded so good.
It was scaled at height. It was a magnificent
Everest, but insert your own Golden Eagle. Dramatic race. Leaders may well have gone a bit too hard. Guess how much he picked up for winning that race? 2.8 million. 2.8 million sterling. Now he's a solid Group 3, Group 2 horse, Lake Forest, but I don't think he's a real ace. So it was another stellar example of Haggis's ability to spot the right race for the right horse down under. We've seen it with various others, Dubai Honor, etc., etc. So a lot of money, but a massive sting in the tail for Kieran Fallon, who copped a 28-day ban, I think, and a percentage of his prize money, which equated to 100,000 Aussie, 50,000 sterling, give or take. So that soured the trip for him to a certain extent. And they are appealing. I saw Kieran interviewed on Racing TV yesterday, said the appeal is in. Now, I have to declare an interest here. I've watched the videos of the inquiry. There's a lot going on. But it was conducted by my best mate in Hong Kong, was Steve Railton, who is one of the chief stewards there. And he's gone back to Sydney now, and he's now the chief steward in Sydney. And he was conducting it in his usual, how shall we say, forthright manner. But he's just applying the rules. And careless riding, and Kieran didn't put his whip down and bumped a horse as he went flying past late on, is jumped on down under. And it's a strange thing, you know, that when we go abroad, whether it's whip or careless riding or whatever, we say, oh, I don't agree with those rules. I don't. But they are the rules. And you can't, you know, shoot the messenger or the steward when he enforces those rules. So interesting to see how the appeal goes. But the main takeaway, I think, was that Haggis he has a tremendous foresight for the type of horse who can trouser a lot of money down under. And it would not shock me if the next British/Irish winner of the Melbourne Cup happens to be W. Haggis when he finds the right horse.
Yeah, it's half a chance of hanging on to it as well, hasn't he, with his owners, which would be a big part of the problem.
Yes.
Just going back to that race, Artie, I mean, Kieran Fallon got all the headlines with his 50 grand fine. The jockey on the second horse also got fined 15 grand. So, I mean, you know, talk about adding insult to injury. You get beaten and then you lose that massive chunk of your prize money as well.
I hope they weren't tapping Nick Luck up for the taxi fare home like Sumion did at Ascot. He'd have to dig deep, would the prolific podcaster, to cover those. Let's talk closer to home. Billy, Down Royal staged the first big meeting of the Ivy season. We were saying Gordon Elliott was out of form going into it. He wasn't there. The big guns delivered for him.
Hang on, Dave, one sec.
Oh, sorry, JC.
Put it on the poll. Do you think that Tony Bloom has compensated Kieran Fallon for his hefty fine?
Yeah, I will put it on the poll, but I'm expecting a one-sided response to that one. But the social guys, you're watching this, get that up as soon as you can, please. Yeah, I'm sure Kevin doesn't have to dig too deep. And neither really did those Elliott stars, did they, who delivered in Down Royal?
That's pretty true, to be honest. You know, it's that kind of a meeting. Elliott targets it more than anybody else, really. Every year you expect him to have sort of 4 or 5 winners on both days. And that was pretty much the case again this year, with one notable exception, of course. His big gun for the whole meeting, Jerry Colomb, who you'd have to say was very disappointing in the big race. But apart from that, he'll have been quite happy with the day, with how things went. Brighter Days Ahead was a good winner of the hurdle on the Saturday. Again, look, she ran to a big enough figure. She run to 150p in time form ratings, which just leaves her a couple of pounds behind Lassie Mouth. I'd be slightly sceptical of that rating at this point of the season. like we said, Elliot targets this meeting. We know his horses are very forward. She beat King of Kingsfield, who's a good horse without being anything exceptional. You know, he only won a maiden hurdle last year, even though he was placed in good company. And the third horse home, Daddy Longlegs, who's very hit or miss, hard to predict. So, you know, she's clearly very good. Elliot was talking about her in terms of champion hurdle class. You'd certainly want to see her again before you'd be talking in terms of that. But they'll be happy with her starting off, as they will be with Firefox, who was impressive over fences. Found the 50, won the other good chase on the Saturday really nicely. Possible King George horse, maybe. You know, I wouldn't be at all surprised if they went down that route with him. And then, of course, we had the big race where, like I said, Jerry Colomb, writing was on the wall for him a long way out. I thought I didn't think Sam Ewing was happy from a long way out. But that's kind of the way he runs. I was expecting that once he did go for him that he'd find plenty, which he usually does. But unfortunately, on this occasion, he didn't. There was nothing in the tank coming down to 2 out, and he petered out fairly tamely. But a massive win from the old boy Envoy Alen, who has run 6 times at that Down Royal meeting. He's won 5 and finished second, just touched off in that race last year. So he's a tremendous record there. We know he goes well fresh. He ran to a time form rating of 165, which is right up there with the very best of his performances, beating Hewick. And yeah, like again, De Bromhead was talking maybe in terms of the King George. I know he's bombed out in it in the past, but they're possibly going to go there again with him. Whereas Hewick might go for the Betfair chase, it turns out, before John Hanlon's little sabbatical kicks in. So
was he asked, Billy? Can I ask you a horrible question? I don't know whether it was on RTE on Saturday. What did Shark say? Obviously, the Betfair chase comes before the suspension. Then what happens?
I don't know, actually. I didn't see that. So I'm not sure. I think he's just going to be wrapped up in cotton wool until the suspension is over, and then they'll make plans from there. That's my understanding.
He's got to defend his King George title, sure.
He's in the race, isn't he? They put him in yesterday.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, clearly there is a contingency plan in place, so that I'm not aware of.
Billy, can I ask you, Fast or Slow didn't appear among the King George entries, nor did Fact to File. Now, Fast or Slow has definitely been mentioned as a King George horse. I wonder if there's anything untoward there. I haven't heard anything, but it was a bit of a surprise when neither of those horses were entered.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too surprised with Fact to File, because, you know, I'd be more inclined, you know, with Willie being a creature of habit that he is, I'd be expecting to see him at Leopardstown once, if not twice, during the winter. Certainly this year. Fast or Slow, yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard anything about him, but that doesn't mean that, you know, like you said, I would have thought the King George was very much on his radar this year. So, yeah, maybe there is a story there that I'm unaware of.
I keep assuming that Hewick's King George win was a pace meltdown, etc., and a little flattered, but he's building quite a CV for himself, isn't he, with his French exploits and last week to boot?
Well, for a horse that only cost 850.
A fantastic race. In fact, to File, Frank Berry did say that they haven't entered because he's staying in Ireland. He does go to Leopardstown. There was no news from Fast or Slow. And Ed, it does put things into perspective. We've talked about the early season skirmishes at Down Royal. Willie sitting on his hands right now with his, but he's put 8 in the King George, including Galloping de Champs. He's left Fact to File out, but he can still muster 8. And you look at the British team that's going to lead the defence, we can barely muster 8 to go in against whatever comes across. It's a division where we really need to see some progress on this side of the Irish Sea with the novice chasers this season.
Yeah, and you look at the top 8 in terms of chasers after the weekend, which hopefully we'll come to, because the racing at Ascot and Wetherby was good too, as well as the stuff Down Royal and Del Mar, Dave Ord. You look at Chianti Classico and the Real Wacker in that list of British chasers, and dear, it's frightening, isn't it? But there are some good novice chasers to come out, I promise you, Audie, with a drop of rain. Particularly, I was chatting to Mick Fitzgerald about the Henderson novice chasers. There's a conveyor belt of good ones to come soon. When that will be, I'm not quite sure.
Let's talk about Wetherby. Ed and I were there, GC. I mean, the Irish Raiders, I thought they were A-listers. They were sent packing by the British Sea team. But how brilliant to see the Real Wacker back, the winning form like that, and for Connections to celebrate a big race win like it is a big race. The scenes afterwards were fantastic and went on and on and on.
That was fun. Go on, Ed.
That's what I took from the weekend, Audie, when I've had a diet of Newmarket and other flat meetings when trainers are on the phone when they win. I mean, the unbridled scenes at Wetherby afterwards. Proper Yorkshire win, wasn't it, Audie, with Irish Connections, but a proper Yorkshire win. It was really good. It was really good. You can see why people at home love jump racing. You know, City of Troy we keep being told he hasn't put out that stand-out performance and we won't see him again. Well, back comes the real whacker after a bad year that followed his 2023 Brown Advisory win. And it was honestly, it was magic for the mad owners, including Davy Mann, who was there in his red suit, and Paddy Neville, whose move in Midland has clearly worked the oracle, really, the way his horses are running. I thought Brian Hughes was fantastic on him. Amazing that he hadn't ridden the Charlie Hall. I was blown away by that. And then his words about Graham Lee afterwards. It was just a real warm, very enjoyable jumps day that could have been so much better. If we had some rain, this jump season would be crackling. I look at Exeter. I'm going to Exeter on Friday. What might have been a novice chase that could have had Shannon Bob. It could have had Captain Teague and others. Has now got 3 runners, and it's just such a shame. It's waiting to really get going, and the weather's halting us at the minute. And I'm afraid Wincanton on Saturday will suffer as well.
Got Bryony Frost back at Exeter on Friday.
Yeah, it's interesting. Very interesting. She's riding that Nichols horse, and Cobden isn't.
Well, she got a fantastic tune out of him at Aintree, didn't she? The day before the National, I think it was.
Fantastic that the jumping, wasn't it?
The horse.
Did you enjoy Wetherby, Audie?
I did enjoy Wetherby, Eddie. It's not quite the Charlie Hall chase of 20 years ago when you used to go and see some crackerjacks, but it was a really enjoyable day. I really enjoyed I did like that reaction afterwards. The fact that they were so ecstatic to have won a Charlie Hall. There was no... You asked them where they were going next. They had no idea because there wasn't... that could look after itself. It was all about the here and now. And what I found fascinating, GC, was the debrief. Harry Cobden, Paul Nicholls wasn't there, but the owners were there, Paul's assistant. It was a good 10, 15 minutes after Braveman's game came back in that he walked back. And Harry's instinct was to reach for headgear. Paul on the Betfair update yesterday was potentially to go to the Covell Gold Cup with him under what would be a big way. He's a horse with something to prove now.
He is, yeah. He still jumps beautifully. He's a real elegant, efficient jumper, and he still travels well. But for the second year in a row in that race, he was sort of worn down, wasn't he, by just a tough arrival late on. So it's hard to think they can get him any better than that mark in the 160s. And if he's going to win a Coral Gold Cup at Newbury, he's got to be better than a 164, 165 rated horse, because he'll be giving bundles of weight to some pretty good up-and-coming horses. So at the moment, I'm sure Paul will have a plan, whether it's headgear, whether it's handicaps, whether it's Ryanair in the new year. He's in a bit of the twilight zone at the moment, isn't he, Braveman's game?
You'd be tempted by that trip drop, wouldn't you? Just the way he jumps and travels. It'd definitely be worth a try at some way, you'd have thought.
I just wonder whether that fire is still burning, I'm afraid.
He went a little to the left off the bridle as well at the weekend, didn't he?
I think I chose the wrong day to be at Wetherby, the Friday one with the bent heat heckles to Dan Skelton after the juvenile hurdle, in which there were 2 finishes. It sounds like it was all happening there. But no, a thoroughly enjoyable day Saturday at Wetherby. We need to talk Ascot, GC, the ultimate winner, Chianti Classic, winning again. What route do you take with him now? Well,
he's got options. He could go for the Coral Gold Cup. He's got a great strike rate over fences. He's already a Cheltenham Festival winner. That was a pretty good handicap, and he was an emphatic victor at the weekend. I believe next year's National is high on the agenda. I don't think you can make that too much of a priority these days. A, because the nature of the race has changed dramatically, and B, because you're going to run into a load of Irish buzzsaws on the day. So I think they could try and take another good prize along the way. The other horse who caught my eye, I think he'll win a good race this year. I think he finished 4th in a hot 2-mile handicap. Master Chewy, the Twiston Davis 2-mile handicap chaser, off a mark in the mid-150s, giving bundles and bundles of weight to some pretty useful horses. He gave me the impression he's going to be a name to note before too long.
Ed, as we record this, we're probably a couple of hours away from what could be Sir Michael Stoute's final, and it looks that way. He said it's in all probability he's bowing out at Nottingham on Wednesday, and it's sort of fitting for a trainer who never seemed to ease on the spotlight that the exit stage left is unassuming, isn't it? There's no great fanfares. It'll just happen when it happens, but it looks like it could be said. We paid tribute when the announcement was made. We're going to ask for your favourite Stoute horse now and why. What was the Stoute horse?
Oh, without hesitation, Pilsudski. Without any hesitation, I absolutely love that horse. What he did in this country and abroad as well. Just the perfect Sir Michael Stoute horse. Pilsudski in a heartbeat. It's just a shame the flat season just peters out, doesn't it? It goes from that high of Champions Day to Saturday at Donny. And I was just most pleased, talking about trainers and Sir Michael Stoute. You'd love to give him a big send-off that day. But I'm glad we crowned champion trainer for once on a day like that, rather than on December the 31st. I don't remember the champion trainer being crowned last year. I don't know whether you do, but
No, it doesn't get quite the fanfare, does it?
It does finish with a bit of a whimper. But Pilsudski, for me, without any hesitation at all.
GC, the Stoute horse that shone best for you, shone brightest for you, sorry.
Slightly self-indulgent. I'll go for Sonic Lady, who, if you're of a certain age, remember she was a brilliant filly in the mid-80s. I think she was the first front page picture on the first ever edition of the Racing Post, which I think was Nell Gwynday in the mid-80s. And she was a tremendous filly. She didn't justify favouritism when she was jolly twice in the Breeders' Cup Mile, but she had a great record in top fillies races here. And she was really tricky as well. She was headstrong, so she was a challenge for a brilliant trainer like Stoute. And the cherry on top was that when I was trying to get a job at Timeform, the late Reg Griffin asked the potential candidates to write an essay on a star horse. And she was the one who got me through the door at Timeform, and I've been paying for it ever since.
Really, I don't know if you would have to write an essay to get there, but if you had to write an essay on any Stoute star, which one would it have been?
I didn't have to write an essay, or I'd be working in McDonald's or someplace. If I had to write one on a Stoute horse, I think I'd go all the way back to Opera House. I was a big fan of Opera House back in the day. He was a tremendous horse back in the early 90s. Second in an Eclipse and third in a King George one year, went back and won both of them the year after. Just got touched off in an Irish Champion Stakes, placed in an Arc the same year. Back in the era of Steve Cawthon and Mouse Roberts and all those great jockeys back in the day. So yeah, he was just one that stood out to me. But look, we could talk about Stoute horses for half an hour. There was so many good ones down through the years.
There was one horse already in my...
The really great trainers, and Cecil and Stoute were both pretty much at their peak at the same time for a long time. But Sir Michael Stoute probably just edges it for me because his international record was spectacular. I think he had over 50 Group 1 winners outside of the UK, including Hong Kong, America, Japan Cups, etc., all over Europe. So a fantastic trainer.
In my time at Ladbrokes, already, I'll never forget. I think even 25 years later, it's still the biggest bet I've ever had on a horse called Greek Palace in the Duke of Edinburgh handicap at Royal Ascot. Clearly a plan that was hatched on the beach at Sandy Lane in Barbados, I think, in January time for this horse to win at the Royal meeting. And in those days, we very much were the magic sign. And my late boss, lovely man, John Thompson, who died recently, actually. And sadly, in those days, there was no internet or anti-post betting for Royal Ascot. But my God, we landed a touch on Greek Palace. Brilliant piece of training. I'll still remember the betting shop, the William Hill in Acton, where I watched the race. And it's fair to say the Ladbrokes anti-post department landed quite a touch on a horse called Greek Palace. And just a bit of Stoute brilliance in the wine stock colours. So with my pocket, I'll go with my heart, Pilsudski, with my pocket, Greek Palace.
Wonderful trainer. There's so many. I'll Ajdal for me, just from the bubble seemingly burst
in the Derby.
Springing at Epsom, and there probably mistakes made along the way, but to bounce back and reinvent as a sprinter and not just win a July Cup, able to blaze down and win a Nunthorpe.
So in your trainer rankings, Audie, is it Tregonning there?
Dick Hearn before Trago.
Dick Hearn top.
Yeah, but Hearn was around at the same time, but that Stoute Cecil rivalry and the horses and it was just they used to come up north, didn't the GC, to the maidens, and they'd be operating like 80-90% at Ripon and Thirst with horses. It was just incredible.
Can I mention very quickly, not trainer of the year or anything, but Stoute's former assistant was Owen Burrows, wasn't he? Mm-hmm. And it went right under the radar that he snuck a nice stakes win on the undercard at the Breeders' Cup, didn't he? Was it Rakia?
Yeah, Shadwell filly, wasn't it? Yeah. And she stays out in America now, I think. They think she wants quick ground and she's going to get more of that out there. But another feather in his cap, another big winner on the back of the Champion Stakes. I'm sure when it comes to the Shadwell allocation, he'll be doing well again this year, and deservedly so after the 2024. Disappointing news we've had for our friend and colleague Daryl Jacob, and a broken collarbone again, just so soon, so early in his comeback from his last injury setback. He'd reached 1,000 winners, which is wonderful. He's now having to rebuild and go through it all again. And
again.
your heart goes out. At this stage of his career, this is his last season. He's all in on intense raffles in the National and some nice horses to ride in Ireland. And you just, the fella didn't deserve this.
No, it's heartbreaking. It's typical of this sport, isn't it? I've retired him once already, Audie. If my voiceover.
I remember.
When he rode James de Burley, he said, "Watch me on James de Burley. I'm going to say goodbye at Cheltenham." We watched him on James de Burley, taking his time, having a look around, and I'm saying this is probably the last time he's going to ride at a festival and so on. And then he decided to carry on and built himself up, got himself back. Not easy. No offence to Daryl. He's no spring chicken. Brilliant effort. He reached 1,000, which we mentioned on the telly up at Ayr on Saturday. Fantastic achievement. I know what that means to him. And then bang, that. And now he's got to start all over again. Oh, just heart goes out to him. He's such a lovely fella, Daryl. He'll be back, though. He's a determined sod, and he'll be back. And I'd love him to ride a big one before the season's out, in the double green, ideally. That would be a very emotive occasion.
We'll be on this podcast as well then for a few weeks as he continues his recuperation. Billy, let's talk about the weekend coming up. We've got Nace, we've got Marine Nationale back in action. Looking forward to seeing him back.
Very much so, yeah. The real racing starts now, already. Now that the flat stuff is out of the way, we're back into the nuts and bolts. Really looking forward to seeing Marine Nationale. The reports from Barry Connell have been very upbeat about him. Unfortunately, we only saw him twice over fences last year, but initially very good, and obviously fluffed his lines a bit at Leopardstown. Clearly wasn't right that day, and hopefully on the comeback trail on Saturday it won't be a penalty kick. He's up against some good horses, the likes of Hercule de Soy, Willie Mullins's. There's a couple more in there that should make it a very compelling contest, if nothing else. But yeah, he seems to have plenty in his favour. Barry Connell's horses are in good nick at the moment. He's had a couple of winners lately. The ground won't be too testing, which should suit him. And yeah, hopefully this is the first step towards a champion chase or a Ryanair for Marine Nationale. He certainly has the ability to do it, and we'd hopefully get to see him do it on the track now, starting off this weekend. But yeah, the good National Hunt horses will all start emerging from now on. So this is an exciting time of the year.
It is, GC. I always love Aintree. Whenever there's races over the national fences, it's always a special. We've got the Sefton on side. It wouldn't be the strongest renewal of the Sefton you've ever seen, but it's a wide open betting heat.
It is. I started looking at it and sort of came away after thinking, well, I already fancy 5 and I've gone through half the field. So I've got a couple of names to note for the next couple of days. As you know, Dave, I'm a big fan of novices handicap chases. I think they're working quite nicely. Horse called Ned Cash makes his chasing debut at Ludlow tomorrow. Yes, I am going for Racing TV. That's why I know he's got a good chance. He was backed as if he was a good thing on his debut for Twister over hurdles, and he jumped and travelled beautifully. Have to think he's a well-handicapped horse, and he'll be backed accordingly. And there's a really good novices handicap chase that comes up quite early on the Saturday card at Aintree. Hillcrest is at the top of the weights. That horse Ed likes, the Nicky Henderson horse, can't remember his name. Shanna Bob is entered in there. I hope they run, actually, because it'll help make the market. Perhaps for a horse of Rebecca Curtis's called Haiti Couleur, who ran really well, just worn down late on in what looked a pretty good novices handicap chase at Chepstow. So Ned Cash, Haiti Couleur is a couple to keep an eye on in the next few days.
And Ed, you're heading to the West Country. It's an Exeter Wincanton double header. What are you looking forward to most?
Yeah, I was born in Shepton Mallet, Audie, so people are almost quite nice to me when I go to Exeter and Wincanton. There was so much good racing potentially at Exeter, but it's slightly fallen apart, unfortunately. And then at Wincanton on Saturday, it's going to be small fields again, you'd imagine, for the elite hurdle and some of the other races. The Rising Stars, again, could have been so good. We might see handstands there of Ben Paulings, which would be great. The Badger Beer will be competitive. Honeyball is so good in those races. Definitely look out for one of his. And then in the Sefton, was Late Night Pass on the short list, GC? Yes. Because you look back at the way he travelled in the Nash, and you'd think the Sefton would be a much more suitable test for Late Night Pass for Gina Andrews and her husband. So I think if he travels like he did in the big one, I think he'd have a big chance in that at the weekend. But we just need rain. I keep repeating it, Audie. The season is ready to really kick on, but we just need desperately to have some rain.
We need Cheltenham to get some, don't we? For John Bon, etc.
It's not much forecast.
No, I can't see much. Country File, that's where I get my weather forecast every Sunday night, Ed. They don't let you down on Country File. They take off the ties, take off the jackets, Go Cars, and they'll give you how it is for the week. Now, I did ask you guys for 1, 2, 3, 4 for the November handicap. I'm sure I sent that message as well. Oh, no, I forgot to hit send on that. But the curtain comes out. I like the fact that's now the last race on the card at Doncaster. It's the curtain literally coming down with the November handicap.
We've got 11 races on Saturday, 11 races culminating in the November handicap.
On a related theme, Kelso, a track I have a soft spot for, don't go there very often these days. They're starting, is it 11 on Saturday or thereabouts? It might even be
11:10.
11:10. Finishes at 1:52 or something like that, is it, Dave? I haven't got the card in front of me. Now, that's all very well, but we're now the best part, the thick end of a year into this project, and it's now not too early to ask a few industry figures, bookmaking figures. Is it working in terms of turnover, this? Because that's the reason for it, to spread the turnover through a longer day than was previously the case. Ed said 11 races live on ITV. The whole idea that it would give broadcasters a chance to tell the stories better was always bogus, but that's okay if it's bringing in the Wonga. So I'd be really interested to hear from a few industry people and bookmaking people to say, are you A, happy, B, satisfied, or C, underwhelmed with the turnover, supposed extra turnover, that these early morning meetings bring in?
Put it on a poll.
Put it on a poll.
Exactly. Yeah, it's all right, Billy. Put it on a poll.
And we have got the capacity to do more than one poll as well. That's the great news. And great news is next week, is it November meeting now? Has it been renamed from the Open meeting? I might have got that wrong, but it's the 3 days at Cheltenham.
Are we ever going to have end of season without DJ? End of season flat awards? We're normally in black tie this time of year.
David Johnson is unavailable at the minute because he's beavering away on the Timeform Awards, which get unveiled on Friday.
Oof.
I'm no spoilers. Although, are the people who get Hawkwing a higher rating than Giants Causeway and Galileo involved, Billy? That's what the people need to know. Is it a numbers game, do you think, the Timeform Awards?
Couldn't possibly reveal any information at this hour, Ardy. That's all been kept under wraps. That's why David Johnson is in a dark room as we speak, crunching all those numbers.
On an even more important point, Dave, have you received Ben Scoop Linfoot's expenses for his trip to California?
Which worries me greatly because he's usually very quick with them. They're very, very early days. It's when he sends them in from Ireland with punts from the Dublin Racing Festival. You know you're in bother, but I dread to think what these could be.
I still remember mine from many moons ago when I went to I think it might have been my first or second Breeders' Cup in California. And I was on the Standard at the time, Evening Standard, and they were brilliant. In the old days of newspaper expenses, they were fantastic. You just had to, put the reason for it. And I was chuckling away when I wrote down on my expenses slip, 32-ounce porterhouse with Hall of Fame trainer Dick Mandela. It got through all right.
If you go for that, you've got to be in company with somebody, haven't you? You've got to have somebody sat over the table. Yeah, next week's podcast we can.
Those were the days.
They were the days. Now I'll itemise Ben's expenses on the podcast next week. We could all go through them and look at how he lived life in Del Mar. But before then, time has beaten us. Thanks to Ed, to GC, and thanks to Billy. And fingers crossed, get some more cracking action this weekend.
Download the Sporting Life app for the best racing coverage, including live racing blogs, fast results, stable tours, trainer and jockey interviews, expert opinion, and tips.